Welcome to Razor Branding Podcast with Jackie Russo. To learn more about how to improve your brand, visit brandrusso.com.
Hi, it's Jackie Russo. Welcome to Razor Branding Podcast. I am so honored and delighted to have with me Michael Murdoch and Robbie Dale with StoryCube. And we are going to talk about branding. We're going to talk about life in the UK. And we're going to talk about where marketing is heading next. So Robbie and Michael, welcome to the show.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you very much for having us. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. Is this not the shortest intro you've ever had? I should just get right to the point. There's no reason to wait.
Absolutely.
No messing.
We buy into that.
Exactly. So for the people who are watching and listening, it's possible that they detect from your accents that you are not from Louisiana, where I am based. So if you don't mind, each of you take turns and tell us where you're from and kind of how long you've been there and just a little bit of background history.
Well, what we're doing. Well, anyone that's listening in from Glasgow in Scotland, which is where I am, will also probably think that it's not where I'm from, but it is actually. I have an overly neutral accent for reasons I'm sure won't come up in this conversation. But I grew up in Scotland, but I was in London for 14 years. That's where I worked. So that's where I started working in agencies and doing various different projects, and where Michael and I met. And then, as one does, had two small children and a wife. Well, met the wife, had the children. That was mainly the order. And then we moved back up here, actually just before the pandemic hit, so January 2020. So it's been a fascinating reintroduction to a city I thought I knew quite well, and then it's all been quite different. But yeah, that's where I am. And then, we were touching this beforehand, obviously, but the remote working process has been, it's kind of chimed, I guess, with the moves I've made. I was, I expected to be on planes and trains and automobiles the whole time, but it's been quite nice. I've just been in this attic. So.
I'm not sure that being locked in the attic is nice, but I'll take your word for it.
I enjoy the attic.
Are you locked in?
My wife wonders why I enjoy it so much, but I just like the quiet. That's the way it goes.
You already told us why, because you have two small children downstairs. So we know why you like it up in the attic. So Michael, tell us a little bit about your background and story.
Sure. So I'm from London and still in London, so I haven't moved very far. I'm a graphic designer by trade. I specialize in brand strategy. I run an agency called The House and have done for about 12, 13 years. And out of that has come StoryCube over the last few years. And that's when myself and Robbie worked a lot more closely together, although we have worked on various projects over the last sort of 10 years in various formats. Luckily, I've worked abroad as well, worked in Hong Kong for a couple of years early in my career. Really enjoyed that and would love to do something similar in the future. Maybe Singapore's on the horizon at some point. But now I get the opportunity from London, working remotely, to connect with people like yourself and clients all over the place in Asia, in Europe, and in the States. So it doesn't really matter these days, does it? You can still travel the world from your room, so it's all good.
I think it's interesting because you're right. It doesn't matter where you sit. All we have to do is navigate the time change. And so as long as we can figure out what time zone someone's in, the rest is gravy with technology these days. So what came first, the pandemic or StoryCube? Was one a product of the other? Well,
I think the way StoryCube is now has been to some extent a product of the pandemic, but it started actually in the we sometimes think back to these days, don't we, Michael, of when we got invited to start doing some workshops basically on branding. Initially at the British Library was probably the main place where this started. So great sort of institution, obviously, in London. And they run classes, they run sort of opportunities for people to come in. They've got a thing called the Business and IP Centre. But we were asked to do that. Or I think, Michael, you'd been having conversations with them and we'd been talking on and off about doing something interesting, which has turned out to be StoryCube. And so we went in and did like a 2-hour session. Actually, I think it was longer than that. I think it was like 3 hours or something of like talk. And it was, I'm not going to say it was awful, because it wasn't awful. It was like the content was there if you could fight your way through the fact that, and these are the lessons I think one learns, don't they, in so many ways. Like, there's too much information. It wasn't structured properly. The Q&A was probably half decent because we were used to kind of doing that. But anyway, we started there, and I think that's 4 years ago, 3 years ago, something like that.
Yeah, good 4 years
probably
ago.
4 years ago now.
Yeah.
And we looked at that. I think we went and to a cafe or whatever. We looked at it and we thought there's something quite interesting here, because we had really bought into the idea of how do you kind of scale the lessons that we'd learned from, 15 odd years working at the coalface at that point. I was a creative director in agencies. I'd worked in branding agencies, digital agencies, with huge clients, with social enterprises, Hollywood studios, politicians, all kinds of different stuff. And you're kind of getting this, I describe it often as an expensively assembled education. There's huge budgets being thrown around, and it's just like going to a big private university for how do you get people interested in stuff. But actually the frustration was either that sometimes those clients, to be completely honest, you were struggling to get to the heart of what their real challenges were because of all the stakeholders, because of all the issues that we all understand in that world. But actually, maybe more pertinently, Michael and I are both very interested in the education world, very interested in social enterprises and charities, as well as other businesses. But in those worlds, of course, there are even more struggles with resource. So the money isn't there, the time isn't there, the team isn't necessarily there. How could we sort of offer that information to people in an easy to digest way, and then scale that to a place where we could kind of say, look, you don't need to spend tens of thousands of dollars, pounds, yen, wherever you are in the world, or whatever you're paying it, to get this information. Don't get me wrong, of course there is stuff that is more nuanced. Of course there are situations that clients are in. If you're a big high street bank trying to compete with another high street bank, different conversation. That's not what we're talking about. But when you are starting something out, or you're trying to scale something quite small, there's some principles at work. And so, to get to the point, we sat down and kind of thought, is there a way that we can structure this stuff into a quite easy to digest package or framework or something? That was the kind of early start. And over, I don't know, Michael, you can pick up the conversation a bit, but over the next couple of years, we kind of turned that from that word soup, right, of just like, oh, we'd like to do this, into what we have now, which is a framework of 6 questions. Is at the heart of it.
Yeah, and I think, like every good business or entrepreneur at the start, we were trying to solve a problem. And at the very early days, it was, okay, what problem can we solve? Is there a problem out there that maybe we've experienced or we know is a problem for other people and we can solve it? Literally could have been anything that we created. We landed on StoryCube. And I mean, initially we had an idea about making contracts easier for agencies and more generally small businesses, so that they didn't have to go to expensive law firms and they could do the basics of employment contracts, of client contracts, on NDAs and all those things, and get them kind of off the shelf and then customize them. And we called that Contract Hero. We went down that route for about 6 to 12 months. It didn't work out. We didn't make enough traction with the legal sector. But interestingly, 5-6 years later, it's becoming a thing now, and there's other companies doing it and doing really well. But then we went back to StoryCube because we knew that a lot of the people we'd worked with had this issue, the main issue of explaining what they do, with the outcomes of looking to inspire, pitch, and sell with ease. And we knew that yes, you could go to an agency or a consultant or a freelancer. You go through the creative brief, you get asked all the usual questions. They may do a workshop, they may do some exercises with you, they work their creative magic, they come up with some ideas, you iterate, and you come out with a solution. But that's all lots of time, lots of resources, lots of effort, potentially lots of money as well, and not necessarily the right outcome. So we just wanted to fast track that, basically. But StoryCube really has evolved over years. It's gone from those dodgy workshops where we kind of explained everything we know about branding, which were still useful and scored quite well, but they weren't scoring very well. We refined it down to the 6 key questions that we have now.
We should probably tell you what StoryCube is, shouldn't we?
Yes, please.
How it looks. I mean, as we've said, it's kind of 6 questions. Michael touched on the point I should have made there, which is it's really about how you explain your organization, right? So whether that's a business, I mean, mostly businesses, but it works for charities. It's interestingly done some bits with personal branding as well, and it kind of works in the same way. And the 6 questions that the framework asks are: what problem are you solving? How are you solving it? What differentiators sets you apart? What motivations do you have? And those 4 elements kind of quantify the what of the story that you're going to tell. And then there's the other 2 sides are connections. How do you reach the audience effectively that you need to speak to? How do you get them excited? And obstacles, what could get in your way? And then more optimistically, how do you turn them into opportunities? And we've boiled that down over lots of, I mean, we've worked, it's at least probably like 1,500 to 2,000 now different organizations that we've actually connected with and put this in front of and seen. So we've learned a lot over that time, but it's been pretty solid really now for at least a couple of years, I'd say, but pre-pandemic. And what we essentially do is put that in front of people and say, if you can answer those 6 questions, you can tell a compelling story about your brand. Now, there's 3 things I suppose we always like to be clear on that I will highlight. One is to say that when we say story, and I think that's a loaded term, especially in this world, and especially there's an element of kind of, yeah, cool, everyone wants to tell their story. What does that mean? I mean, to me, it's as simple as it is the way that you convince people of something, that you reach a target with them. It's, the parables in the Bible are great stories. My small child trying to get me to give him chocolate at 3 a.m. It's not 3 a.m. He's normally asleep at 3 a.m. Thankfully. Let's try 7 a.m. Still happens. Tells a good story. He understands the audience he's talking to. He understands what levers to pull. He doesn't get it because I'm a grown human being and I can deal with my child, but he gets pretty close. He does a good job. So understanding that element and seeing it as it's not a fuzzy, fluffy, let's use long words and be kind of crazy. It's about being precise and accurate and actually understanding exactly what that problem is so you can communicate it, exactly what sets you apart from your competition so you can communicate it. I think that's one element. I mean, another is that you will tell lots of stories. When we take these 6 points down, but actually the reality is that is going to form your sort of core, that you may have a B2B and a B2C element to what you do. You may be working in China and the US and Europe, and there are different things that you want to promote in each area. You may just have different products, obviously, that you want to sell. So that's good as well, and you kind of build up from there. But I think the heart of it all, and Michael sort of touched on this, is we recognize that people struggled to kind of take this like its brand, its value proposition, its storytelling, its marketing, its strategy, all these words that if you're like a founder, you've just had a nice idea and you're trying to do something with it, or you're from a finance background, for example, an operations background, it's just a bit scary and a bit crazy. And so the final thing with a cube that we always say to people is it's a cube on purpose. It's solid, it's physical. And I mean, the alternative was we were going to call it story insect because that has 6 legs. But Michael didn't want to own any cockroaches and keep them around his office. It was a little, it weirded you out, didn't it? But we thought with the cube, it's kind of like a foundation brick that you can sit down there and you can then build things on it. And so from a sort of, and I get a bit creative directory, but it's like you can build things on top of it. It's a solid thing. You can hold it in your hands. You can move it around, and that helps, I think, people as well. Once we kind of hit upon some of that element, people kind of saw it very much as a like friendly thing that they can totally do, not something that's a dark mystic art. And again, of course, you take this stuff to the extreme. There is a lot more to it. We're not trying to pretend that. We're also not trying to do ourselves out of business, because obviously a lot of the work we do as consultants or as agency-wise, whatever, is it goes into much more detail and nuance. But this is, you need to get to the start line. You need to be able to compete and on things and think about this stuff. And we really hated it, I guess, is the pretty simplest way to put it, when we would see organizations fail because they missed some of this stuff, which just should be basic, should be go for it. We don't want to hold people back. We'd rather they didn't pay us and went and did amazing things rather than fail. That's don't want to be there.
Do y'all find, and this is what we find often with clients in the States, that they're so focused on features. They want to tell you how long they've been in business, how many employees they have, how many locations, that they don't understand the importance of getting from features to benefits, much less to stories. So how do you train people out of that mindset to say, it's not about the features. Nobody wants to hear about you. They want to hear a story that they can connect with.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely something that's important. We look at solutions, and two part of that is what you do. That's the basics, and that's normally what people know and how they start. But how you do it, what's your process, what's your systems, and what will be beneficial, as you say, to the customer, the end user, the person that's going to, or the organization that's going to add the revenue and create the profit, and how do you keep them happy? Part of that would be looking at the differentiators as well. Yeah, it's worth highlighting things like you've been around long enough to show credibility, but it's got to connect with what's important to their customers. It's got to be the right awards. It's got to be the right case studies that are relevant to them, showing sector knowledge. It's got to be the right testimonials. It's got to be the right reviews, and they should be 5-star reviews, if not 4.5 star, and completely relevant to show every single time. That testimonial should also follow on from the value proposition, reinforcing that value proposition of, is it high quality? Is it delivered on time, on budget, by experts that really know the industry? So yeah, we always suggest simplifying back down to, what are your core principles? What are you doing for your customer? Have you validated their customer problem to solve? And therefore everything you say follows along those lines.
I think the other thing, I find myself constantly saying when we do Q&As and we do a lot of workshops and stuff with StoryCube, and we do sort of industry specific sprints and things like that over a couple of weeks where we bring cohorts together. So a real mix of stuff. But one of the things I find myself constantly saying is, like, as a consumer, how you go about looking at things. We get served advertising all the time, we get recommendations all the time. And in the modern era as it is, you recognize an issue that you have. I'm hungry, I want a sandwich. You're walking down a high street, you are looking at the different places, making decisions based on the things that matter to you. It might be price related, it might be specifically what you want, it might be how I wouldn't look cool if I go into that sandwich shop, I will if I go into that sandwich shop. I don't know who's making that decision, but you get the analogy. And we know that instinctively because we do it all the time, and it is hard for other people to get us to put our hand in our pocket, to get us to give them time, to get us to give them energy. And as soon as you kind of recognize that and hold that mirror up, I think you're kind of talking at least on a basic, that is what everyone's doing. And sometimes you have to go into the kind of like, I've never actually had to go this far, but it's like, make a list of the priorities in your life. If a brand is in the top 100, you've got a serious issue, mate. Like, that is not normal. It's because it's just like, lying on this fluffy carpet, that sounds more fun than going and buying a Coke or getting a new Apple product, whatever. Like, that stuff's still great. Don't get me wrong. I love a Coke. I love an Apple product. Fine. I'm a normal human being, but it's not right up there. And so you've got to tear people away from the kids and the football and the friends and the family and also that's all positive stuff, but the pressures of real life, like paying the rent and having a sore leg and whatever else it is. So sometimes holding that mirror up, I think, is the functional way to do it, with hopefully some humor, because otherwise I think people take it a bit far. But it's important, and it's the only way to get to the right answer, and that's all we're trying to do, is help people grow what they're trying to do.
Right. Do you find that most people are able to follow StoryCube and become the writers, find that writer within them? Or in the end, do they still need some professional guidance, because some people just aren't very good writers and storytellers?
Yeah, I think that's probably a fair assessment overall. I mean, like anything, like, there are people that kind of, it clicks for them, and I think they've sort of found the missing recipe for whatever we want to call it, that suddenly they go, okay, I get that. And we do say to people, this is the start point. You want to now go and test the usual stuff as well. You try this, you test it, do more of what works, do less of what doesn't. But there are people who just kind of, could you help us out? And I mean, I'll let Michael pick up the baton from this, but to some extent that was the genesis, really, of starting to create something that we could put out there.
The aim, and it works best when companies are looking to grow, but it doesn't matter what stage of growth. So it could be day one, and we've had companies day one, they've got an idea, but they're very keen to make this happen and take it seriously. And so they sit, they listen, they take it in, they practice, they give things a punt, they try their best, and they come out of it with a framework and something that makes it easier. And that's absolutely fine. But then there's companies who've literally had 70-year-old businesses on board as well, but they needed to reinvent what they were doing. It was the third or fourth generation. It was a family business, and people, the people taking over, were looking to do something different. Also, the competitors were different. The audience was different. Their product might be different. So yes, they got the same name as a company, but they needed to reinvent themselves and look at their story again. So, but again, they've gone through the same process. They're still new to storytelling. They're still new to marketing and branding, and needed a framework to go through. We always relate it to cookbooks, and Robbie's just mentioned a recipe. I am a terrible cook, but if you give me a recipe, I will follow it diligently and hopefully come out with something that's not so bad. But my wife is a brilliant cook, and she'll happily just make stuff without recipe books, but she still likes a recipe book, and we'd still follow the same thing. But I know she's adding those little extras that doesn't even cross my mind, and making the dinner that much better. And it's the same with brand storytelling. You might do better. That's we always ask the question, how strong is your brand rated out of 10? A self-assessment right at the start, and people often give 5, 6, 7 out of 10. Nothing much more than that. It doesn't really matter what score they give. We say at the end of this session, we want you to be 1 point on. At the end of 2 or 3 weeks of doing this, at the end of 3 months of doing this, and at the end of whatever experimentation time, we want you to keep going up towards 0.10. And it's a constant battle, and it might go up 0.1 at a time. But that movement is really important. And obviously for the bigger brands that have been around for ages, and doing brilliant things, then it's going to be the 1% difference, not the 10-20% difference. It's those tiny little things that push them just enough so they're ahead of the competition and get the attention of their audiences, whether they're charities or private sector companies.
What do you say to the people who seem to be confused about what a brand is in the first place? You know, as they're going through and doing the self-assessment, and they think you're just talking about the logo, instead of the emotional connection, the messaging, the story, how it all connects.
I don't think, I think there was definitely a time where we used to go quite heavy on that. And I think if we have to, we kind of talk into this is everything you do, it's a reflection. And I think we talk, I guess what we say within the sort of the core StoryCube materials, as it were, because there's an online course and all kinds of stuff as well, is this is the bottom of a pyramid, basically. This is the foundation, and everything that you're going to do will build on that. Your design elements. So yeah, of course, your logo and your packaging and whatever marketing you do, but also how you do your customer service, also how you recruit, all of these different kinds of things. And people kind of tend to get that on board. Now when I say get that on board, I think the sort of nub of your question is there's a kind of academic, like, okay, yeah, I kind of see that, but let's, are we going to make the logo look different or whatever? Or actually, weirdly, we've had quite a few briefs recently, Mike, haven't we, where people have said, don't touch the logo. Which I've never quite noticed that before, but they've sort of come for branding not. So that's kind of a good thing. Like, they recognize that isn't the be all and end all. But I do think that even when that's happened, other stakeholders have kind of gone, well, I don't see the point in any of this because we haven't, changed the logo, basically. And that's what we feel like we're paying for. So, I think, again, and I always bring it back to things. I think, again, it's asking people to recognize, when you see, a logo is a symbol, it's a symbol that represents something, but I can't just slap, the Nike logo or whatever onto a thing. And if it's like a shack in the middle of, you're going to know that something's not quite right. That's not doing all the work. Now, you might think to yourself, I don't know, is this some kind of cool thing? Are they doing like a partnership with the Kenyan Athletics Foundation? Like, I don't know what's going on, but it might be that someone's just using that stuff and it doesn't matter. Whereas equally, we know the opposite, which is you go into, I don't know, probably something like a restaurant's a good example, where you think, oh, I'm not too sure about this, but it is what it is. We're hungry. This is where we are. But you get incredible service. The food's beautiful. Everyone's really friendly, and you just like completely fall in love with it. But you might not even remember the name of it, later, because it's kind of just somewhere you stopped off on a road trip or whatever. And that stuff, that's the stuff that you get people go, oh yeah, like that is true, isn't it? It's like, yeah, because you're a human being, you're trying to connect with human beings, so you use that because you've been around for 20, 30, 40 years, and you can kind of take that on board. And I think that's what personally, that's what I was trying to drag people back towards, to get them to understand.
I think we had a bit more of it in the early days when we were first testing everything out as the workshops at the British Library every month. It was called Branding on a Budget. So it guided the conversation. It guided the type of people that wanted to come along. They had a small budget generally. They were starting out, and that was our own positioning. And it's I mean, as an agency and creators with creative background, we also had our own challenges of what are we creating? We're not really sure. It's evolving over the first year or two, and therefore the positioning needs to evolve as well. So we've gone through this process for ourselves in trying to create it for other people. And we did talk about what is a logo. Here's our famous logos. Here are not very good logos. Here are brilliant logos. Here are clever logos. Here are fun logos. And we, in the end, have ditched all of that because we realized that it's not important and it was detracting from the main conversation, which is about, as Robbie says, it's the foundation. What is the strategy behind the company? And part of the strategy is in some way storytelling and explaining what that strategy is. So it's as much about business advice as to who are you helping, how are you helping them, what problem are you solving, how are you going to deliver on that. And there's even conversations when we coach and consult directly about the day-to-day running of the business. But that obviously evolves into our key expertise of, okay, well, we can turn that into a story. We can turn that into value propositions and mission statements and values, and all the way down to what do you put in an email to in terms of sales. And obviously in terms of the look and feel, if appropriate. If it's a new business, they need something. If it's a current business that's been established, then often a rebrand is needed, even if it's just a tweak to what they've already got. And as Robbie said, like recently we've had 2 or 3 briefs brought to us and saying, please don't touch the logo, but we're open to changing it if needs must, but it will be based on the brand strategy and the positioning, not just because we want to change it. And these are expensive processes depending on the business. Changing the logo physically is just expensive and sometimes unnecessary. So I can see why they wouldn't do it. So there just has to be good reasons. But that comes with a more mature business. And now with StoryCube, I think our messaging is clearer to say this is about the story and the strategy, not the look and the feel necessarily. That comes later. And we're probably talking to more established businesses which get it anyway.
Right.
We used to get a lot of, I think actually naming was always a big thing as well. People always get obsessed about the name. And when I think about smaller organizations, we would get these questions a lot because when we started out doing the British Library, and even still do some quite open things, people will come who are really just, kitchen top table, is that a phrase? Working out their kitchen, doing their business. And I constantly saying to people, they'd be obsessing over, it's like, but what's the name going to be? What's the logo? What do you do? And it's like, I make jam or something. And you're like, stick it in some things, go to a market, sell the jam. Well, what shall I call it? Oh, what's your name? Michael's Jam. Like, that's it. The rest of it just doesn't matter. Come back when you've gone, I'm selling really good jam, and I think I might need to take this a bit further because, lots of reasons why you would want to do that. And, and that's the simplicity of it, but it's always going back to do something, and talked about what you achieve that's active and tangible, not this fluffy stuff over here. I mean, I always think the Beatles is about the worst band name I can think of, but I mean, that hasn't held them back. So it's it's all good.
Right. I think you make a great point. There's 2 comments that I have neglected to share as we've been going through this. One of my favorite humans in the world, Jonathan Sachs, says, totally agree. And this is literally 30 minutes ago. So I'm not sure what he's agreeing with, but we sounded really smart when we were talking. It's understanding the client's concept. Right. Well, Jonathan's smart. So if he agrees with you, that's a good thing. It's understanding the client's concept and why that person is buying. And then my number 1 favorite human, Michael Russo, says, exactly, you have the right to give them a reason to pay attention, why they should care. And so I think that comes out of the story. There are 2 Americans who I think have done a really good job with story. And I'm wondering if you know them, follow them, think they're rubbish. See, I was going to work in an English word at some point. One is Park Howell and the other is Donald Miller. And Donald has On Becoming a Story Brand. Are you familiar?
With Donald Miller, yeah, I am. I don't know about the other guy, Robbie.
Park is really good too.
I'm useless. I don't pay much attention. Unless it's Paw
with Donald
Patrol,
Miller,
I see very little these days.
It's very interesting because we started StoryCube about 4 years ago, and I think it was about 12 months in, people started saying, "Do you mean Story Brand?" And we were like, "No, what are you talking about?" So then we looked it up, and yeah, I'm a big fan. Really great frameworks there, really great processes, really interesting videos. And there are similarities for sure. So yeah, we enjoy looking at that.
Well, I think any good brander is going to have those similarities because we all believe in exactly what we've been talking about, which is you have to give people a reason why. And so you have to communicate that in a story. There are differences between you and your competition, and you're not right for everybody. How often do you get that? People say, who's your target audience? And they say, everyone. Everyone.
It's a classic, isn't it?
Right? I have yet to find one company whose audience is truly everyone. Not one.
Because I think even we use examples of things like energy companies, and it's sort of UK based stuff, as I know we've got an international audience, but part of the reason for that is like, all the gas and electricity that goes through, although we're having huge problems over with gas and electricity at the moment, because we don't have our own, but it's it's the same, it's exactly the same, you switch exactly the same. But that even more makes the point that the different organizations, of which there are, even just in the UK market, dozens and dozens, but certainly big ones and small ones, they have to talk to the audience they're talking to. And it might be green energy, and it might be price sensitive, and it might be community based, and it might be service based, whatever. But that is like the pin. That's not what makes it everybody. That's what makes it even more specific. Right. I think generally something like, I don't know, you can sort of argue that bits of technology, the cell phone is for everybody. See, I'm going American now. Is for everybody, but obviously not. That's not one brand and one product and one thing. Yeah, the concept is, I guess so. Even though there'll still be people who aren't interested. But ultimately it kind of goes out. But yeah, it's a sort of painful thing. We do in StoryCube. One of the things that sits behind all of the framework is we try and be as clear as possible in any materials we have. So same the course materials we have and the sessions we do, about how do you actually put this into action, and what are the kind of functional things that sit behind it. And one of the things we talk through is that things like adoption curves and the simplicity of just saying, like, start niche, and then talking about Amazon, talking about Facebook, and saying these are the biggest companies on the planet. And they started with very specific things. I mean, I normally make the point that Facebook started out in a really creepy place, rating women. It's in a pretty creepy place now. But as joking aside, Amazon was sell books, and then you can see it. Bezos is a rich man because what they worked out all of these different things. But it wouldn't have worked. You can't launch Amazon now. You can't just launch Amazon there. There's Amazon. What does it do? Everything, mate. It does everything. We've got an airline. We can do your web hosting. Whatever. It's seeing that sort of growth.
The good news, particularly for people that join our sessions and the online course and the workshops and the webinars and the sprints, is that it's easier. If you go more niche, if you focus on a certain audience in a certain area, demanding a certain requirement, then you will understand them and you will become the expert very quickly. So a lot of companies are very scared of doing that because it feels like you're closing off all these possible sales. Right. But in the long run, it's actually so much easier and more enjoyable, I found. The more niche we go with our offerings. So, for example, we've sort of dabbled with it in terms of sprints, and we use the online course as a basis. We use our expertise as the basis and our experience, but then we take cohorts from different sectors through 2-week programs online. One sector that we specifically look at is EdTech, because we've got a lot of experience in that area. In the last 7 years, we've worked with at least 50 companies, if not 100 in some way, from the EdTech environment. We know we have a lot of connections in terms of events and awards and associations in that area. And so we can reach that audience really quickly. And when they say, this is my problem, we can think very quickly, yeah, we've heard that 10 times. And this is the solution. And it's not a solution that we may have come up with. It's the solution that we saw other companies come up with. And we've seen that process over the last 6 to 12 months. So we can almost speak from the heart, really, about what did they do to solve that. Or in terms of the cohort, it's even better because we get a good understanding of who's in the room. We can say, right, what's the key challenges that you want to discuss? One person raises a point and the 3 others say, I've got that challenge. And someone else says, and this is how I overcame it. And it's wonderful to go in that route. So I would definitely promote niching as much as possible, because you can always work outwards. If you crack that niche, whether it's a sector or location or a service or whatever you're delivering, then you can just work your way outwards. And you've seen it for so many big companies like the Amazons of the world. They're cracking one niche at a time and just taking over.
Well, that's the thing to recognize, isn't it? That you're not. There is no big homogenous thing. It's all focused in different ways when you get to that scale. I mean, the other thing I always point out to people if they're struggling with it is, it's like, are you going to get good fit? We'll go British, good fish and chips from a fish and chip shop by the sea, or are you going to get it in a pub that has 150 different things on the menu? Like you know where you're going to go and get the best thing. Yes, it's a functional version of the thing, but that is so you go there because you're going to get the best. The same is true of pretty much everything. You get it instinctively as an individual. And sometimes, and this is the point, overall point we're making, is you sometimes need to tell those stories to people to get them to understand that and kind of connect the dots, which is always quite fun to do. But as Michael says, you only get this stuff, and you'll know this yourself. You're talking to people day in, day out. It's such a part of it. And I think actually, it's quite a nice thing. It's quite nice to talk to people who don't do it day in, day out, and be able to share that stuff, because they've got 1,001 skills that we don't have. I've only got about 2 skills. I'm not even sure this is one. Well, I don't know. I mean, that's not for me to say. But it's it's great to see that and then plug it into other things, because sort of our approach is never to sort of believe that there is not other forces at work within a business. We run business. We're used to that. My wife runs her own business. We see this stuff all the time. But it is understanding that today we're going to talk about this, and we're going to get you to understand this. And once you understand that, you can then bring it in to the messy world that is reality. But if you don't understand it at all, how are you going to mix that in the first place?
And when we think of entrepreneurs, I think most businesses are probably small. They're less than 50 people. That's where a lot of people are sitting. And that's maybe all they ever want, which is absolutely fine. And so it comes down to motivations. And that's the fourth side of the cube for us. It's understanding what's the motivation for the founder, what do they want to achieve, and therefore whether to go niche or not is part of that. Is part of it to have a fortune in the end and maybe exit at some point? That's probably part of it for most entrepreneurs. But is it to be flexible? Is it to have fun? Is it to really understand your market and have a nice life work balance, really? And so going niche helps with all of that, because you can target your market, you can understand your market, you can reach the audience, learn from it, build a craft around it, probably then turn a profit more quickly without having to overstretch yourself. Whereas being a generalist, particularly from like an agency or service point of view, is just tricky, because you're always learning and there's always something new, which is kind of exciting in its own way, but it's more like chasing your tail. So especially for companies that are still relatively small and haven't got management teams and departments and things like that which can have separate niches, we would always say start with the motivations of what do you want to achieve, and therefore which niche gets you there quickest, because if you nail that, you can expand afterwards.
Right. Is StoryCube all pre-recorded, live? Is there a blend of both? How do you kind of set it up so that people are getting the lessons that they need?
Well, it's an ongoing sort of challenge that we're dealing with to work out the best way to get this stuff. I mean, there is so we have there's course material that it kind of underpins everything, that is the for one of is the go-to core information that we cover in any situation, and that exists as an online course with pre-recorded video and exercises and PDFs and whatever, which is great. And then we've used that to develop, so we've got a 2-week sprint that we do, which is basically, depends on exactly how we run it, but 4 or 5 live, whereas I go through a bunch of stuff. So if people get bored of me, that's a nightmare for them. And we have sort of breakout rooms and Q&A and sort of try and mix up the styles there to get stuff across, and that focuses on a different part basically of the cube each time. And we can bring guests in then and stuff like that, which is quite fun. So it's a much more of a kind of all-in thing, and we've been quite fortunate because we've found ways to sort of get them sponsored so that it's free for the end use. For the users, as well as get people to buy into them, and we've kind of been exploring really the best way to do that. But our goal overall is to make it as accessible as possible. So it's very much trying to sort of balance. Then is it good to have 10 people in there, or 20? Is that better, or is 5 better? And it's always a journey. And the answer is, well, they're all good for different reasons, and there are challenges for other reasons. And then we connect people on a Slack group at the same time and do some other things as well. But we also do a lot of one-off things. So sort of, 2-3 hour sessions, even as short as an hour, where we just go over bits for, particular organizations or particular groups or even companies themselves. And actually we've started to, we've been mixing it into bigger projects we've done. So as I say, Michael and I were working together on a much bigger branding project, traditional branding project for a company. And we'll say, look, we would like everyone to get an understanding of this stuff. So we'll sort of, it's not free, or so throw it in as part of the deal, as a value added extra. We'll run a couple of workshops up front, and we'll give everyone the course and that kind of thing. So there is a core of information, which is relatively simple. And we've tried, I don't know if you've got thoughts on this, Michael, we've tried quite hard not to mess with it too much once we've kind of got something.
Right.
But instead, because I think it's easy to sort of keep tinkering and then not really know what the thing you're trying to tell people is. But on the flip side, try and be as clear and acknowledge as much as possible that this is a starting point. This is not everything you need to know about everything in 10 minutes. That's not possible. What it is the map that can point you in the right direction, and then you'll see how far you go. And if you really want to take it further, yeah, of course, that's going to go beyond the bounds of a generic piece. But one of the things we offer people who take part in our different sessions is kind of introductions, business introductions and stuff, because we recognize that, and we've been lucky, we've got a lot of connections in the legal world and the education world, and obviously designers and web designers and animators, whatever it might be. And so it's been quite useful to sort of go, look, we recognize that, so use this as a starting point, and we'll help you keep going, because that is the motivation we've kind of got, is to say, yeah, you will do well off your own graft, off your own idea, but if you move in the right direction and we can have a little piece of that pie, and it's always nice to see people succeed.
Yeah, it's interesting from a personal point of view as well. It's kind of scratching an itch for both of us in terms of moving from service-based company into product, but it's still a halfway point. So it's relatively comfortable. The service-based agency model, absolutely fine. You find some work, you get referrals, you do a bit of marketing, do a bit of sales, you win some pitches, you deliver on projects, and then you rinse and repeat, and that's absolutely fine. That's the bread and butter. But this is moving into the ability to scale something, and to also have something that we do today that's worth something in 10 years' time. It's not just a project that disappears into the ether. It's something we can keep building on. And as Robbie says, we try to be as disciplined as possible about what we do with StoryCube now. In the first couple of years, it was changing literally every month. Every bit of feedback we were getting, we were going through it with a fine-tooth comb and trying to understand what they mean, what they want, is it relevant? And we still look very carefully at the feedback, but we're very considered about what we change. So the last 12 months, maybe even 18 months, it hasn't changed too much. It's been built upon and improved. We've improved the wording, the exercises, the videos, but from an outsider point of view, they probably wouldn't see a huge amount of change. So it goes back to that 1% difference again. And hopefully the overall feeling of people who complete the course and go through the sprints is that was slick, that was even better, that was even more useful. And our feedback improves. We started off in the 6s and 7s out of 10, and now luckily we're getting the 9s and 10s out of 10, and eventually all we want is 10s and extra referrals. Got to have somewhere to go.
Right.
So yeah, it's been a great journey for us in that point of view.
That is
but
awesome.
There's always room for improvement.
Well, and I know where you're coming from. I have taught workshops and branding trainings and seminars. And so during the pandemic, we took all of that online and created Brand State U for the same reason, because people still needed that assistance and that help. For us, it's been great because the people who can't afford the agency, the startups, the solopreneurs, this gives them an outlet to still learn what they need to know. And I feel like it really fulfills the mission that we have. All right. This is the funnest part of the whole day, the lightning round. So I'll let you rotate going first. So Michael, we'll start with you. Favorite place on earth?
Oh, he's paused. I don't know where he's just disappeared.
That's even better. Is it like so deep in thought that he just can't think of his favorite place on earth? So Robbie, you get to go first until Michael unfreezes. Oh, wait, are you back?
No, I am back. Yeah. Sorry, okay, I lost you for a moment there.
That's all right. Favorite place on earth?
Who's going first?
You are. Michael goes first.
Oh, right.
Michael, favorite place on earth?
Favorite place.
It's not very lightning, is it, Jackie?
Not really lightning.
Sorry. India.
Okay.
India in terms
Robbie?
of travel.
That's a big place. See, I'm gonna go much smaller and say that it's down in my living room with my wife and my kids. That's the only place I'd like to be, really.
That's good. I'm glad you didn't say the attic. I was a little bit worried about that.
No, I do love my family.
Okay.
It's just
good.
nice to,
All right, Robbie, you get to go first this time. A movie you can't turn off.
Oh, I mean, I love Pulp Fiction. I can keep watching that back to
Okay.
back.
Michael?
For me, Back to the Future every time. I
Oh,
just love it. Just the music.
so
gets me.
classic.
It's a good
So
one.
classic.
Yeah, I could have that too.
Right. All right, Michael, TV show that you like to binge watch.
I don't know if it's binge because you can't, but Strictly Come Dancing is a guilty pleasure. I don't know if you've
Okay.
got it over there, but yeah,
No, we
Interesting.
do
do love
not.
it.
We got Dancing with the Stars. I think that's the
Oh,
The
big
so
equivalent?
that's the equivalent.
Okay.
I've been binging through the American Office, The Office, but the
Oh,
US
yeah.
version. I mean, the UK version is pretty much my favorite show of all time. But
Sure.
the US is what I like about it's a different show. It's just, I mean, it's all built on the same principle. I mean, it's kind of elements of story. It's built on a core truth, but it has its own personality. But yeah, I've been binging my way through that for a few weeks now.
That's awesome. Robbie, favorite book?
I mean, my wife, I barely read. I'm awful. Do you know what? I was talking to my parents-in-law about this the other day. Like after university, I studied philosophy at university.
Mhm.
You do a lot of reading when you do philosophy. Although, as my lectures would tell me, I'm not sure they noticed I did much reading. But I've been terrible at reading books since then. But from years and years ago, I'm a big fan of this book called "If on a Winter's Night a Traveler" by Italo Calvino, which
Okay.
is a book where each of the chapters is from a different book. It's a bit of an experimental thing, but it's pretty cool.
Awesome. Michael, favorite book?
I'm terrible. I'm even worse than Robbie. I get told off by my family for not reading at all, really. But if it is a book, it's going to be an autobiography or a book about business. So
right.
The E-Myth is always a classic.
Oh,
that
I
like to go
love
back
the
to.
E-Myth. Michael Gerber's brilliant.
I'm
Michael,
just
favorite?
go on, go for it.
I'll say favorite podcast.
Podcasts. This is a personal thing. I love rugby. And surprisingly, I got into the podcast as well. I thought talking about rugby would be pretty dull, but it's quite funny. So that's something for me to switch off. I need to do more podcasts though, and I always get recommendations all the time. So I need to make time for that.
All right,
I mean,
Robbie, how about you?
There's one I listen to every day, which is on BBC Radio 2 over here in the UK. There is at 10, I think it's at 10:30 every day. There's a show called Popmaster, which is a pop music quiz. It's a bit of a national institution, and that got made into a podcast about a couple of years ago. Now, probably it was there, but that is pretty much my daily listen in on go there. I mean, it's a radio show really, but they turn it into a little podcast, and it's my long-held ambition to be on the show, but it's quite hard to get on.
That is fantastic. Gentlemen, I cannot say thank you enough. I appreciate you. I'm guessing getting up really early or staying up really late. I'm not sure which one we asked you to do because of the time.
No, it's mid-afternoon.
The
Yeah,
afternoon.
Oh, okay, good. Well, then I
I've
appreciate
had
you
lunch
skipping.
for chilling out.
I think you were
tea.
drinking a coffee and getting ready.
I've got a cup of tea.
for the
I'm
day.
English.
A cup of tea. I figured it was a cuppa. Well, thank you both so much. And for everybody watching and listening, please make sure you check out StoryCube and get to know Michael and Robbie even more. Gentlemen, it was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was very, very fun.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
When the day is through.